KU is in the thick of it in the Darrion Williams chase. Can they get the player I named the number one player available in the transfer portal? And what does it all mean with Williams and Tyran Stokes, the number one recruit in 2026?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, whether you're listening on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcast. And thank you to every dayers catching each and every episode of the show, or if you're a first-timer and making it your first listen for the first time. On today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks, we're discussing Darrion Williams once again, the transfer from Texas Tech, who I think is an absolute stud, and some, I guess, recent news about KU making a possible push at Darrion Williams. What it all means, along with Tyran Stokes, and if they're intertwined, if they're related at all. And then we'll finish up with a little bit of latest news as the transfer portal gets close to coming to a close. Also some other stuff with other news with KU Volleyball and some Sharon Lokiti stuff. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time, and you can get your tickets to all sorts of events like summer baseball with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Okay, so there was a rumor that came out earlier today. I guess you're listening to this on Tuesday, yesterday, but that came out on Monday from Trilly Donovan that was kind of making its way around, I guess, KU social media, among KU fans, among anybody who wanted to talk about this thing, the message boards, whatever, about Kansas is making a push for Darrion Williams. And to what extent that exactly means, we don't entirely know, right? Does it mean they're not going to be outbid? Does it mean that they're just trying to make it happen? Does it mean they're trying to get a visit? Who entirely knows what that means? But that does seem to be a good sign for a guy that at one point in time I have dubbed, and I don't know, it'd be interesting if I were to, re-rank everything. I think he'd still be number one at this point for me, among portal targets, so to speak, and guys that I think would make sense for KU to go after, right? You're looking at somebody who can, if you're trying to find, another key player, you want somebody who's good at shooting, okay? Where Darrion Williams checks that box. You would like to have another wing. Darrion Williams can play the 3 on offense. He can play the 4 on defense, right? He's somebody who's hit clutch buckets. He's somebody who passes the ball well, so you don't have to worry about him like, oh, is he going to come in and the ball's just going to stick in his hands and it's not going to find its way to Darren Peterson? No, you don't have to worry about that with Darrion Williams. And everywhere he's been part of a winning team. He went to the NCAA tournament with Nevada. He went to the NCAA tournament twice with Tech, including making it to the Elite Eight this season. And honestly, they should have beat Florida, the team that won the national title, right? So, yes, this is very big news. And there was some previous smoke for Williams with like BYU was one of the schools that I think was publicly. There were some other schools that maybe were more privately discussed here. But BYU was kind of the big one that came out. And I'm sure part of the reason that came out was because, if you're meeting with a lot of these schools, if you're Darrion Williams, if you're the agent, the schools that make sense to leak out are the schools like Kansas and Kentucky and Carolina and whatever, the normal schools. But also BYU is one of those schools you want to leak out if you're the agent and the player, because BYU is sitting on kind of a money landmine, it seems right now, where they're able to, pay top dollar for a lot of these really good players. So if you're an agent and you have interest from BYU, why would you not release that? Because then that's going to signal to everybody else who's interested in them, you better come ready with the money, right? And so I think in itself, like when you see that, it kind of makes you believe that if Kansas is going to land him, they're going to need a big check to be able to do so, right? But beyond the actual like possible impact that Williams could bring, of which, as I kind of just mentioned, like I think he would bring a hugely positive impact onto the Kansas basketball team. And if you want more on why I think that, go check out the deep dive on Darrion Williams, which we did, I don't know, a week ago, something like that. You're on Locked On Jayhawks, and if you're never there and you already caught it, thank you to you for doing that. But I find it super interesting that this Darrion Williams, I guess, news, this rumor, this whatever you want to call it, comes out on the heels of the Tyran Stokes visit, right? And there's a couple different ways that you can look at this here. Could this be a play by Bill Self and Kansas to try and gain a bit of leverage with Tyran Stokes? Now, I don't know, leverage might be too strong of a word here because I don't know that you can really get leverage in this case. Like you're trying to wait on the decision from, a teenager, not kind of the other way around. Yeah, I don't know. It's like he's the number one prospect in the country, right? Like it is his decision. This isn't the NBA where you get an opportunity to draft number one in the draft or something like that, right? Or so maybe the more proper way to put it is like, could this be incentive to come out to try to speed up a possible decision from Tyran Stokes? I'll be honest, I don't think that's what this is. So this story just came out from Shreyas Latta, Kansas City Star, who we had him on the other day too. So thank you if everydayers caught that one as well. And here's the big tweet. Here's the quote from the tweet from Shrey. It says, as for the rumors about Tyran Stokes reclassifying to the class of 2025, and this is in Shreyas' story, which again, you can check out kansascity.com and in the Kansas City Star. That's never been on the table. Kiera Stokes said, I believe that mom, he's not even NCAA eligible because it's never what he wanted to do. So he has to finish his senior year. Now, we keep hearing this from like different people that like he's not going to be able to reclassify. And I've kind of said before, like, okay, could that just be, speaking of leverage, a leverage play by his camp to be like, hey, we're not going to reclassify. But then it's like, well, what if we pay you an extra $1 million in NIL? Then when you reclassify, and then it's like, oh, well, come to think of it, yes, we can make that work. But now the fact that it keeps coming out more and more and more, and now you have it from like the mom, I don't know. I'm starting to actually kind of buy into that no, he is not going to reclassify. And I brought up on one of the recent episodes, I felt like this kind of happened with Darius Acuff last year, not to this extreme, and Acuff wasn't the level of recruit Stokes is, but it was like last, offseason is, could he reclassify and, play one of your combo guards and yada, yada. He ended up not reclassifying, and then he ended up picking Arkansas, although I do think a little of that was, Kansas going more for Darren Peterson, which was obviously, I think, the right move for Kansas. But anyway, I don't necessarily know that would be the case, too, because when you look at where this rumor is coming out from, it's coming out from Trilly Donovan, who is very plugged into the college basketball world. But if Kansas was trying to get a message out there to Tyran Stokes, I don't think it would be coming from Trilly Donovan in a private Discord. I think it would be coming out from, I don't know, like a big, like a John Rothstein, for instance, or, one of these, I don't know, maybe even like a Joe Tipton, where it would be like kind of coming from KU. If that kind of makes sense, like with Trilly, it feels like if the purpose is KU trying to leak data to try to sway something in their direction, that wouldn't be the avenue. They go to Jeff Goodman, something like that. You know what I mean? And so the fact that it's coming out there, I believe this to be just that rumor is about because Kansas wants Darrion Williams. And that's kind of how I view this year. And so that's interesting. But is it still tied in with the Tyran Stokes thing? This is where I think it becomes interesting, because could this be a reaction by Bill Self and KU to the Stokes visit, and not just the visit, but talking with him, meeting with him, all that sort of stuff, either in knowing that, okay, if he does reclassify, which again, that seems like a long shot at this point, that it might just take a long time. Like he might be going on other visits. What if it takes him to do summer school to be able to knock out that opportunity to be able to join early, right? That it might take the process a long time, or that possibly he's leaning another school's direction and Kansas doesn't think they're going to be able to land him. Or, and I think this is the most pertinent one out of all of them, since he still is in the class of 2026, and you see that quote from his mom, that he is going to stay in the class of 2026, and therefore Kansas has basically an extra chunk of change lying around for the 2025 roster, right? Like imagine before this visit happened, Bill Self calls up one or two of his, big money donors, and he goes, hey, we got an opportunity to possibly land this kid. We're going to try to get him to reclassify, but we're going to need the funds to be able to do it. And we're visiting with him this weekend. I need to prepare a package of what we can offer him. What can you do? And whatever that number ends up being, I'm just going to throw out a number because, we know AJ DeBonta went for like, $4 or $5 million. Let's just say, again, number one recruit in the country for 2026. Let's say it's $4 or $5 million, right? And he comes up with that $4 or $5 million. Okay. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the donors are going to be like, yeah, okay, well, we're just giving you the $4 or $5 million, do with it whatever you want. No, like rich people stay rich for a reason, and they want to use their money on things they want to use their money on, right? And so, you could see it being a situation, though, where now Bill Self, at the very least, knows he has access to that funds. And so he talks to Tyran Stokes, again, this all hypothetical, and they do figure out, okay, well, we are interested and we still would love to have you, but it sounds like you are going to be more 2026. But now Bill Self knows, hey, I do possibly have access to that money, but I'm going to have to convince those big money donors. And then he fires up the Darien Williams deep dive on Locked On Jayhawks, and he sends it to those big money donors, and he says, look, you got, I'm obviously joking. That's obviously not what happened. But he convinces those big money donors, hey, listen, if you're willing to spend that much, we can bring in this Darien Williams kid. And we're not going to be able to get Stokes this year. This is our best option for this year since Stokes would not be an option there. And I think there could be something interesting there that then once at that point, if you are the big money donor and you've basically already, even though you haven't given the money, you have like mentally in your head prepared yourself that you could be giving the money, maybe it makes it easier to say yes. Whereas before, maybe you're like, you know what, I'll give $2 or $3 million for Darien Williams. And now you're kind of sitting there and you've talked yourself into it more and you talked yourself into the Stokes thing happening, but then he's not going to reclass. And you're like, well, I still want a good player. And you know what? This Darien Williams guy, he is coming around on me. And you know what? Let's kind of spend that money. So I think it brings up an interesting possibility of, you know, hypothetically, could Kansas land Darien Williams for this year and then get Tyran Stokes for next season and kind of have your cake and eat it too? Let's discuss that on the other side. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Game Time, where you'll be able to get tickets to KU basketball games coming up in the winter, or you can go to Royals games during the summer, or whatever you're nearby. I don't know where you live, but you know, there's probably something going on, whether it's concert, comedy, theater, or sporting event near you. And Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high if you're looking into going to the NBA or NHL playoffs. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save up to 60%. Here's why I use Game Time. They have their last-minute deals, which is available, as I just mentioned there, save 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the all-in pricing you can toggle makes it so that there's no surprise fees at checkout. There's nothing worse. You're like, oh, I got a pretty good deal on these tickets. And then you go to checkout, and it's like, boom, way more expensive with the ticket fees. Just toggle the all-in pricing on Game Time. Don't have to worry about it being a surprise. What you see is what you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDON, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. I'm not winning the spelling bee anytime soon. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, continue on. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. So, is there a chance that Kansas could kind of have their cake and eat it too? Could they land Darien Williams for this year's team and then get Tyran Stokes for next year's team? And in a weird way, like, is that almost the perfect scenario for you if you're KU? Because you already feel like, okay, we already have this generational, you know, freshman prospect coming in with Darren Peterson, and we're trying to build it around him. And theoretically, as good as Tyran Stokes might be, and he has the higher NBA ceiling and higher future potential than Williams, you know, Williams is a more sure thing. He was an all Big 12 player this past season in the conference that you play in. You know what you're getting a little bit more. Although I guess we say that you thought you knew what you were getting from like AJ Storr and Ryland Griffin too, and that didn't always work that way. But point being, it's the idea that you could then basically do what you're doing now and do it again next year, right? The same way you're building it around Darren Peterson, next year you could build it around Tyran Stokes, and you still get a Darien Williams this year. And then hypothetically, what if you get the Darien Williams version in next year's offseason to pair with Tyran Stokes? You know what I mean? There is some kind of beauty in that, and it allows you kind of that perfect mix of being able to, I don't know, like try to hit a home run in the offseason in the present while also having that future opportunity in front of you. Because at the end of the day, it does feel like you are, I don't know, you're almost playing like, even though the season hasn't even started, we're so far away from the season even beginning, you're almost playing already on borrowed time because you know that you're realistically only going to have 1 year with Darren Peterson. And so like knowing that in the back of your head, you're trying to take advantage of that in every way that you possibly could. Well, if you get Stokes for the next year team, even though they're different players and you don't know how, you know, each one would impact things in their own different way, it kind of extends that window of having like that premier possible top 5 pick in an NBA draft to back-to-back seasons, which would be, you know, really cool for KU. It also, would give Kansas the opportunity to get back-to-back number one recruits for, I believe, the first time in the recruiting era. They've had number one recruits, but I don't think they've done it in back-to-back seasons, which is obviously very difficult to do, right? And so you would think if you have the money to bring on Tyran Stokes this year, which would then be deferred to paying Darrion Williams this year, that you would just be able to say, okay, and then we'll just reload it next year, because it'd probably be difficult to afford both Darrion Williams and Tyran Stokes on the same team. I don't think that would happen, to be clear. But now you can kind of spread that out and be like, okay, well, I'm paying this much for this year's roster, and then I'm paying the same amount next year. And you're able to kind of slot that in and make it work, right? Would that kind of be the ideal outcome? I do think that is very interesting. I will say, if we move to the hypothetical world where if Tyran Stokes, counter to everything that's been out there, counter to what his mom said that we mentioned earlier in the episode, if he was actually open to or able to, reclassify to 2025, and again, that seems like a very far long shot at this point in time. If that were to be the case and you did have to pick between one or the other, right? Again, sure, hypothetical world, Jeff Bezos is like, you know what? I really want to see Darren Peterson play with Tyran Stokes and Darien Williams. And he goes, I'm going to pay Tyran Stokes $10 million to reclassify, and I will buy him the best tutor in the world to get all the summer classes done he needs to do. And I'll pay $10 million for Darien Williams, and we're just going to have fun. And I'm just going to ask for you to have an Amazon patch on the Kansas logo, in that hypothetical world, sure. But like, realistically, you only land one of the two. And again, Stokes probably, to me, at this point, I'm reading it as he's staying in 2026, and your best shot is just get Darien Williams now. But in that hypothetical world where you did have the option of Stokes decides to reclassify, and you basically have to say, we only have enough funds to bring in one of the two, Williams or Stokes, I do think you take Stokes at that point in time, even knowing that Darien Williams is the, proven collegiate player, that he has shown he can do it on the big stage, right? He hits the game time shot that sends it to overtime against Arkansas in the Sweet 16, right? That he has produced both times that he's played against Kansas in his career in like very real ways, that he wound up on the all Big 12 first team. Now, it's a 10-player team. I don't know if he would have been on the 5 team, maybe not, but regardless, like one of the 10 best players in the Big 12 this season. And if you account for the players leaving after that, like that would make him one of the, I guess it's hard because teams are bringing in really good transfers too. But like, point being, one of the 10 best players in the Big 12 this season, right? It's hard to say don't take the sure thing kind of in front of you. It's like the Family Guy, the box episode. Like, Tyran Stokes could be anything. He could be all Big 12 first team, It's like Darien Williams was that. But I think you take it because the ceiling of having a guy, if Tyran Stokes hits, is just at a different level than what you would kind of get there. And the idea would be, honestly, if you gave me the option, if I had the ability to somehow make this happen, you can have Darien Williams now and Tyran Stokes in 2026, or you can have Tyran Stokes now and TBD player in 2026. I think I would still take Stokes in that situation. Again, I'm as high on Darien Williams as anybody, right? He's my number one transfer player available for Kansas at this point in time. But the reason why is sometimes we view this as like, wait, so you would take Darien Williams in 2025 and Tyran Stokes in 2026 over just Tyran Stokes in 2025? No, that's not what I'm saying. Because theoretically in 2026, you're going to have other money, you're going to have other scholarships, other availability to go out and get that year's version of a Darien Williams, to where then it just becomes, oh, now you're maximizing your opportunity to play around Darren Peterson with another guy who's another number one recruit in Tyran Stokes. So that's why in that hypothetical, I would take that. Is that hypothetical even available? Doesn't seem like it at this point in time. So, roundabout way with all of this to say, maybe the lesson here is that Tyran Stokes is indeed saying in 2026, based on what everybody's saying, based on the visit, and maybe that's what led to a charge from Kansas to say, hey, maybe they were interested in Darien Williams, maybe they offered him a certain number, maybe, yada, yada, yada. And then when Stokes said, no, I'm firmly on the visit, maybe he said, no, I'm for sure staying in 2026. Kansas said, okay, we're ready to add another digit onto this number that we're offering Darien Williams, because he becomes our best available option at this point in time. But you can't go wrong with either guy. And, I love me some Darien Williams, and we'll see if he ends up in a KU uniform. We'll break that down if anything happens right here on Locked On Jayhawks. All right, some news. The portal's closing soon. Also, a weird flurry of 5-year guys entering the portal. An interesting name that Kansas had a visit on has re-entered the portal. We'll break all that down and more coming up next. This episode of the show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Baseball season's in full swing, pun intended, and there's no better way to get in on the action than Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs. Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. I always take advantage of Taco Tuesday, which, hey, if you're listening to this on a Tuesday, boom, Prize Picks offers discounts on select player projections for even more value. You can download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game with Prize Picks. Finishing things up on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us on today's show. And again, don't forget to make Locked On College Basketball or Locked On College Football your second listen every day. So the transfer portal closes on April 22nd for basketball here. I don't know if it opens back up at one point, like during the summer, similar to how, football does during the spring at one point. But regardless, it's not that players have to have committed by then. It's just the players have to have entered by then. So you see kind of a late flurry with different players entering the portal and going off. So that'll certainly be interesting, but it also will put a close on, waiting for, are there going to be more players enter in at this point in time. Again, I don't know if there's a later one that they can enter again later in the year, but yeah, there's that. Also, this came from John Rothstein earlier today. NCAA members will not discuss whether or not players will receive 5 years of eligibility moving forward via legislation until after a final decision on the House settlement has been made. So it sounds like they are going to discuss it, but they have to figure that stuff out first, which puts a lot of these guys who would be 5-year players in limbo for a long time. And then it's like, okay, like hypothetically, like Zeke Mayo, like theoretically Zeke Mayo would have been a fun fit next to Darren Peterson. He would have provided a lot of scoring and offense, right? But it's like, if they don't pass a rule on you can be a 5th-year player until, September or like the 3rd week of August and school's already started, like it's a little harder to get those players, especially because a lot of them are going to be at that point like, okay, well, I've moved on. I've signed with this G League team, or I've signed with this Euro League team, or whatever it is. So that'll be kind of interesting, though. And there was a weird flurry of 5-year guys. There already have been a bunch of guys who have entered the portal over this, I don't know, whatever, like last week's month, whatever, that have been guys who have already exhausted all their eligibility, but they're just entering just in case. Like Eddie Lampkin entered, for instance, where it's like, yeah, you had the COVID year and then you played 4 full years. Like you were out of eligibility. But if they give that extra year, then you add an extra year of eligibility. And I think there's even a suit going on where somebody's trying to sue the NCAA in one of the states or something to have just like unlimited eligibility, which that would be kind of a mess with all of this. I think Shaq Moore entered, although I think he exited the portal quickly after with Kansas and stuff. So it's a mess right now, obviously. A little KU volleyball news. They released their schedule with the Big 12 schedule and everything on today, and they've got some fun non-con matchups. I mean, Penn State obviously sticks out. An exhibition game against Nebraska obviously sticks out, but the Big 12 conference will be fun as well. But yeah, here's one of the key highlights. They're going to be playing Kansas State in Allen FieldHouse this season. And so I think the last time they would have played in Allen FieldHouse, it would have been when they were hosting they used to, when they hosted, they would host some of these games in the NCAA or in Allen FieldHouse in the NCAA tournament. And there's one of the years they made the Sweet 16. I think they beat Wichita State and Creighton. I forget which was first round, which was second round, a little over a decade ago. And then I think lost to Washington in the Sweet 16 that year. And that was in Allen Fieldhouse. But after that, they started doing them at home. They wanted the more friendly confine environments. They had one year where they had to go to Topeka because of a conflicting men's basketball game. But and that'll be really cool because there was back in the day, and there's a photo somewhere that I haven't been able to find like on the internet. Send it to me if you have it. There's a photo of one year, I think it was Kansas, Missouri, played volleyball during Late Night in the Fog. And it was like I don't know if it was the prelude or what, because at that point it was probably still Midnight Madness. So maybe it was just at a normal time. And so you had all these people there for Late Night Fog. And so it was a full sold out Allen Fieldhouse for KU volleyball game. That would be so sweet if they could do that, or even, kind of get close to that. And we'll see what goes there. And then the last bit of news here, Sharon Lokedi, who's a former national champion in long distance running for KU track and field, who always has, stud athletes there. she won the Boston Marathon. So that was really cool to see, and Jayhawk pride representing there out in Boston. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. Back at you with more transfer portal talk on tomorrow's episode of LOJ.